Shalom and welcome, everyone. Welcome to another episode. This is episode 39, if I'm not mistaken, of A Jew and Gentile Discuss. I am your host, Tony Pino, and I have my co-host here, Brother Mitch Chapman, and we are having a wonderful summer. We are coming at you. It's another Wednesday. We try to do these on Wednesdays, record them, and then send them out sometime that day, if possible. But we had a wonderful time last week. We went ahead and got a hold of a video of a gentleman by the name of Rob Solberg, or you may know him as R.L. Solberg. And he's basically created a ministry for himself that focuses in on trying to discredit those who believe in following the Torah as Gentiles and Jewish believers, one in Messiah. He believes that he's making correction. He believes with all his heart that he's doing the right thing. But we found last week that he really hasn't done his study good enough. He definitely has been making some basic errors in some of his interpretations on the idea that Gentiles and Jews together do not have to follow the Torah. We talked a lot about that last week. We're going to touch on that some more. We're going to do a little recap here. But Mr. Solberg seems like a nice guy. We're not trying to slander him in any way or so forth. We don't think that he's not saved or anything of the sort, but he is teaching an error. And so you can have a false teaching, but yet not be a false teacher. I think that's pretty important too. You know, many teachers have sections or parts of their theology that is just off base. So that area might be a false teaching, but that doesn't necessarily blanket them as a false teacher. So we're not trying in any way to do that. The goal for me and Brother Mitch is to bring unity to the body of Messiah, that we can walk in discipleship, that we can walk one together as the Bible teaches. I believe from Genesis to Revelation that it teaches that the Gentile and Jew are to walk together in the covenants given to Israel, one in Messiah, as the kingdom of Yeshua is blanketing the earth. It's going across the globe, okay? And so when last week we began to look at Brother Solberg's video, Mitch began to walk through it here. Brother Mitch, might as well just go ahead and bring you in now. Sorry about that. How you been doing this week? I'm kind of ready to get started here, so I was just rolling right into it there.
No, that's okay. Really doing.
Been having a little bit of trouble with Brother Mitch's connection here. So hopefully he'll be back here in just a second.
Yours now is just about to happen, and that is I have total clearance to return anywhere that I want to go, which is only going to be Uganda, but you know, on the continent of Africa. But all that I'm waiting for is just the formal passport letter to come. Then I can renew or apply for a brand new passport, depending upon, you know, a conversation that I would have with the State Department, and then I'm off. And we'll be doing these. My side, I'll be in Africa doing these from Uganda. You'll still be here in the States, and maybe one day you'll join us, and we'll do it from Uganda.
That'd be sweet. That'd be sweet. Now we're looking forward to seeing Brother Mitch is longing to get back with his family there in Africa and Uganda, and so. A lot of little hoops and red tape, of course, jumping through, traveling across the different countries is not often as easy as everyone thinks. And so he's been waiting patiently, and the Lord has provided his way. So he will be reuniting with his family here real soon.
Amen. And as it would be said in Uganda, Amina or Amina.
Amen. Now, last week, when looking at the video, Brother Mitch, we went through probably about 15 minutes of the 21 minute video or so, and kind of recapping. All right. So today, just so everyone knows, we'll be recapping, finishing up Mr. Solberg's video. And then if we've got time, which I think we will, we'll go into Dr. Michael Brown's video concerning whether or not Gentiles and Jews all need to, walk in the Torah. Did Yeshua fulfill the Torah? Is basically what he's going to be talking about, mainly in the New Covenant passages there. So we'll be hopefully touching on that video, and then the following week going through more of Michael Brown's arguments also. Just like Brother Mitch said last week, we kind of want to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. We don't want to misquote people or not. We want them to, go ahead and share what they feel, what they believe, and then explain what they believe. And then we can go ahead and give our, side of the story, so to speak, or, our interpretation, and then let you guys decide. You guys do your own study. All right. This is just a great way to hear both sides of the arguments. And then you figure out what is most consistent with the scriptures. All right. So last week, Brother Solberg started out by saying that according to his encounters with ethnic Jewish people, he can find none that believe that Gentiles are to find the Torah or follow the Torah with them together in Messiah Yeshua. He mentioned Hebrew rooters who he thought were only Gentiles. And so I know many ethnic Jews who believe we should be following the Torah, or the Gentiles should be following the Torah with them. Brother Mitch here, one of them, he knows many of his ethnic brothers and cousins that feel the same way. And so Brother Solberg is just off on that. We would not call ourselves Hebrew rooters because of all the stigma that goes with that. There's a lot of, teachings in there that we wouldn't connect ourselves with. And I don't think it's any different, Brother Mitch, than Christianity, right? Just because you call yourself a Christian doesn't mean you connect yourself with every teaching that every doctrinal denomination holds to. So we're just being fair.
Exactly.
It's important for us to express what we believe. So,
right. For me, he just starts off. I understand the method to his madness when he's just trying to draw people in, and he does a really good job of doing that. Basically, taking every particular people group, lumping them all together as one, and then getting the same answer from them all. So let's break it down just a little bit to have a better understanding. So he'll start off, and again, let me just say this, that Tony and I have no malice of heart, none whatsoever. As Tony succinctly indicated, this is not a salvation issue whatsoever. It isn't. And to that, one of my ethnic Jewish cousins to come away with an answer that would indicate that the reason that we observe, that we keep, that guard, that we do Torah is for salvation. That's a church teaching. That's a church teaching. There's no Jewish person, except if you end up in a church, as I was for 13, 14 years, you will continually hear it from the pulpit. And at that point in time, I didn't know anything when I started my journey. And I started to believe the stuff that was being taught that my people believed, because I didn't know. And well, they know, right? Well, no. But he starts off with Reform Jews. Well, if you know anything about Reform Judaism, and I do, because that's the branch of Judaism that I came from, there's three major branches of rabbinic Judaisms: Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox. Reform is the lowest rung on the ladder. Any times before, with Orthodox, you have regular Orthodox and you have ultra Orthodox. the two main groups of ultra Orthodox, and there could be more, but the two main ones that everybody really knows are the Breslavs and the Chabads. Here's the funny thing. Chabads don't believe that the Breslavs are Jewish because they don't do it their way. The Breslavs don't believe that Chabads are Jewish because they don't do it their way. Both the Chabads and the Breslavs don't believe that the traditional regular Orthodox are Jewish because they don't do it any one of their ways. Now it even gets worse. It's a slippery slope. Any form of Orthodox rabbinic Judaism doesn't believe that conservatives are Jewish because they don't do it any one of the three Orthodox ways. And now you take all of the Orthodox and the conservative, and they look down to the Reform Jew and they say, you can't possibly be a Jew because you don't do anything our way. So all of that to say, now I made a very broad, very, very broad assumption or distinction here, okay? But I know Reform Judaism because that's the branch that I grew up in. And I didn't know it then, but I know it now, is that Reform, if you were to place Reform Judaism in a church denomination, it would be liberal. So do you think a liberal pastor is going to agree or disagree with LBGT or whatever that alphabet soup really is, and some of the other social issues that are totally not biblical? The answer is, of course not. Of course they're not going to agree the biblical side, meaning that they will agree that it's okay to do all of this stuff when you have the word that absolutely contradicts them. So, you know, as I started to go through the video again, so my questions in my mind. So, okay, so you say the Orthodox. Well, what Orthodox rabbi did you speak with that says this? What branch of Orthodoxy? You mentioned Messianic. You mentioned that you went to a Messianic congregation. I don't know if it's a Messianic congregation or it's a Messianic synagogue. Now, here's the difference. Although all Messianic synagogues are Messianic congregations, not every Messianic congregation is, in fact, a Messianic synagogue. And the main difference between the two would be a Protestant pastor or a Catholic priest.
You had cut out that when you were explaining that. So what's the difference between a Messianic congregation and a Messianic synagogue again?
Okay, so a Messianic synagogue is a Messianic congregation, but a Messianic congregation is not a Messianic synagogue. And the reason being is that in a Messianic synagogue, you're going to have traditional liturgy. You'll have a Torah service. You'll have a Torah procession. Those would be the two main differences. But you wouldn't, would you expect a pastor or a Catholic priest to say that Torah is for people? No, of course not. And as you said, Tony, the HRM, that's just, they have some really wacky beliefs. You get into flat earth, you get into
sacred names,
you get into paganism,
two house theology, all that stuff.
Two house replacement. God divorced Israel, which is not literal. Although they say it is. and a whole bunch of other nonsense. Lunar Sabbath.
Yeah. I mean, that's why you and I stick to the scriptures, right? The reason why you and I hold that all are to follow the Torah is because that's what the scriptures teach, right? Not only now, but in the future, especially the future, we will all be following the Torah. So,
But not only now, Tony, and not only in the future, Isaiah 2, but let's jump back for a moment, 2,000 years ago. Now we're in the first century, but what was even before that? And this is where we're going to start to really get into it more, to help many understand that although, yes, without question, Torah was given at Sinai in Exodus 19, no question about it. However, you have to go back to earlier chapters in Exodus to really understand what was happening. But even before that, let's go back to Genesis, where we have the call of one man. That man became a family. That family became tribes. That tribes became a people. That people became a nation. That nation became a kingdom. And then the kingdom split after Solomon died. Okay, so now let's go. That's history of Israel. You know, in colleges they go 101. This is like 97A.
mhm,
This is like preschool.
right.
It really is. So in Exodus, you have a similar situation, very different. Now, yes, Abraham is not a Jew. Abraham became a Hebrew because he crossed over, and that is, in fact, what the definition of a Hebrew is: someone who crossed over. And what does Yeshua say? You have crossed from death to life. Okay? So, in Exodus 6, we have the 4 I wills. We've discussed this at length when we were talking about Pesach several months back, and also as in another series, Sunday Night Live, when I taught through the patriarchal covenants. In Exodus 6, verses 6 and 7, you have 4 I wills. I'm going to just break them down. In 6:6, you have 3. In 6:7, you have the 4th. Expression of redemption relating to the land. So in 6:6, the first one is, I will bring you out. That's the first cup at Pesach. Then it also, I will rescue you. That's the second cup at Pesach. Then we have the third cup, which is, I will redeem you. So those are the 3 separate I wills of Exodus 6:6. Now we get to where the rubber meets the road in 6:7, and it says, I will take you. Now, here's what's really interesting that not many people know, that I just happened to stumble across it, I think maybe, I'm going to say 3 or 4 years ago, and blew me away, because for all of the time that I have been teaching, and I've heard it my whole life, is that at Sinai, this is where Hashem married the Jewish people. Okay. And you're looking through it in scripture and you don't see it. Well, you can, but you don't, because if you understand, if you've ever been to a Jewish wedding, you'll know that there's a chuppah. Well, the clouds were the chuppah at Sinai. If you've ever been to a Jewish wedding, you'll know that nobody is really standing flat-footed on the ground. They're elevated. They're on a bima. Well, what was the bima? The bima was Sinai. In a wedding, in any wedding, there's the bride and the groom. Okay, well, who is the bride? Israel. And who's the groom? Hashem. But there's the friend of the bride. And who is that? Moses. Okay, so, and then there's also a sign of the wedding, or a sign of the covenant as it's actually recorded. And I'm getting just a little bit ahead of myself here. In Exodus 31, at any wedding that I have ever attended, before you may now kiss the bride, and everybody's getting all excited, there's an exchange of vows, and there's an exchange of rings. And the ring is circular. There's no beginning, there's no end. The ring, you put it on the finger, and although today it's on the left hand, it was always in ancient times worn on the right. So the bride and groom exchange rings, now it's on the hand. But what is it? It's a sign of what? It's a sign of their marriage. It's a sign of their marriage covenant. When you look at Exodus 31, you'll see Shabbat is the sign of the covenant. But of what covenant is it? Mosaic covenant? Sinaitic covenant? Those are church terms. That's dispensation theology. That's only 180 years old at most. Maybe give or take a couple more years. But what is it a sign of? It's a sign of what happened at Sinai, and that was marriage. So Shabbat is the sign of the marriage covenant. And let me say this, that there's a heated debate or argument, because sometimes it can be elevated. What's the proper day? Every day is the proper day. Here's the distinction between the first day of the week, which is one distinction, and the seventh day of the week, which is the first and the seventh. They're not the same, okay? But there's only one day of the week in the seven where Hashem himself has commanded all of his people, his born again, to use that term loosely, which is like saying HRM or Christian, because who knows anymore. So I use a different term. That
You're going to have to repeat that term again, Brother Mitch, because you were frozen.
okay. All of those who have faith in the biblical Yeshua, which means you accept Yeshua's messiahship and you accept his divinity. That's it.
Yeah.
Now, many people will say to that, well, that's Christian terminology. That's Christianism. That's Christian theology. And my response to that is, well, what came first? What came first? When did Christianity really become or come on the scene? It wasn't until the Nicene Council in 325, when it became the official religion, and that's what it is, it's a religion of the papacy, of Rome. So let's come back. So in 6-7, I will take you This is a term. I'm going to read. I don't have the actual source that it came from, so I apologize for that. But the phrase "I take you, my people, and I will be your God" is an adaptation of an expression from the sphere of marriage. The ancient Near Eastern wedding formulation was, "You will be my wife, and I will be your husband." Similarly, the divorce formula was, "You're not my wife, and I am not your husband." What does this mean? Does God intend to take Israel as his wife? You betcha. God likened himself to a suitor and the people of Israel to the young woman he's courting. And just as a young man, a wife feels great love for the woman on whom he has set affection, Hashem delights in the people of Israel. He was not content to simply redeem them from slavery. He wanted to take them as his very own people. That is to say that he desired a personal relationship with God. Now, in 6:6, 6:7, and 6:8 of Exodus, those are all expressions of redemption. But it's interesting to note that the fourth expression relates to marriage. And there we have that at Sinai, I look at it this way. Here in 6:6, there's the betrothal. They're married, but there's no consummation of the marriage, so to speak. When we get to Sinai in 19, now we have the wedding ceremony, the actual wedding ceremony. And the analogy would be, for me, in Uganda, you have a cultural marriage. It's called an introduction. It's not coming to meet mommy and daddy of your intended bride. That's not what it is. It's an actual ceremony. It's a covenant meal. You're asking questions. You're being asked questions by people you've just met for the first time in your life. And you don't know if you're going to be it or not. There's a price that's paid, etc. So all of that to say this is that I am, excuse me, I'm culturally married. In Uganda, everybody knows that I am married. Everybody knows that my wife is married. Everybody knows that she's married to Mzungu, a white man. Everybody knows that he's coming from America and is coming soon. There's no question in certificate. How come you're not wearing a wedding ring? Who were the witnesses? Did you actually have a ceremony? Did you have a certificate filed? All of this and all of that. Now, okay, so we're culturally married, we're betrothed. It's a legal marriage. Would anybody say, really, that Joseph and Miriam were not legally married when they went off to Egypt? Some will say, but what's the basis of saying that? Because they want to refute Yeshua's divinity? Of course, that would be a reason. They want to come up with all sorts of nonsense regarding Miriam as well. So here's the answer. When I return, we will have an actual marriage ceremony. We will have an actual wedding certificate, and we will have the actual wedding certificate actually formally filed with the proper authorities in the district. That will provide me with standing to adopt my daughters, 3 of them, and they only know me as their daddy for the 3 years, etc. Now, let me clean that up a little bit, because I know what some crazy people will be thinking. You just met your wife 3 years ago and you have 3 children. Boy, she must be promiscuous. Wrong, not even close. So get that thought out of your stinking mind, okay? Because if I know why you're thinking that, but also throughout Africa, they practice a form of levirate marriage. And specifically in Uganda, there is a high rate of orphans running around. And what family does in Africa is family steps up. So one of my daughters happens to be Grace aunt, who just turned 7. One of my daughters happens to be Grace niece, who will be 6 in December. And her only biological daughter will be 12 next Wednesday. So those are the 3, okay? My whole point in saying all of that is when you understand that it starts from 6:6, that God had an affection for Israel. Now, at this point in time, it's only the Israelite people. I get that loud and clear, okay? However, through progressive revelation of Scripture, we now jump to the plagues in the very next chapter in Exodus 7:5. And what was the purpose of all of the plagues? Very simply, one succinct statement summarized this way in Exodus 7:5. I got the wrong scripture. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong book. That's why. I'm looking in, I opened up to Leviticus, not Exodus. It happens. Give me some grace. It's in the Torah, even in the garden. Okay, Exodus 7:5. And this, so the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you as God to Pharaoh, and Aaron, your brother, shall be your prophet. Now we come down to 5. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. That was the whole purpose. Okay. Now we have the great chapter 12 of Exodus. And we know that among many different things, what's happening here, we have Pesach is instituted, the calendar is changed, that the 7th month becomes the 1st month, the 1st month now becomes the 7th month. You want to call the 1st month of the year Abib, God bless you. You want to call it Nisan? On your purity. So now let's get deeper, because this is where we're really going to pick it up. Exodus 12, verse 37. We did this last week, but I'm going to show some other things. And again, this is to demonstrate that not all who were at Sinai were in fact original Israelites, which is the point that Brother Solberg has been making. The distinction between Israel, or the house of Jacob, and those who are foreigners, but then there's depending upon the English version of the Bible that you use, you could end up with 3 different Hebrew words for the same English word, which is a travesty. So Exodus 12:37. Then the children of Israel. So who are these at this point? Who are the children of Israel right here? The children of Israel right here are those that can trace their genealogy back to Jacob, because Jacob was rightly called Israel after he came to faith, after the wrestling with the angel who was Hashem. Okay? Verse 38. This is the introduction of the mixed multitude. Listen carefully. A mixed multitude went up. Went up where? Went up with them also. So we're seeing that whoever this mixed multitude was went up also with them. And where did the them that they also went with up go to? Sinai. And where? Well, they were being led up out of Egypt, but eventually they're going to come to Sinai in chapter 19. And they. Now, who is the they? We have in 37 and 38 2 separate, distinct people groups who have not yet been combined in a marriage, but yet, according to 2 separate and very credible Jewish sources, this will blow you away. The first is the Gutnick Torah, or the Gutnick Torah. And I'm going to read from the Gutnick translation, Exodus 12:38. Also, a great mixed multitude of converts from other nations went up with them. And from another translation, or actually from a commentary, and the commentary comes from Rashi. Now, if you don't know anything about Rashi, Rashi is considered the foremost commentator on the Tanakh. And in Orthodox circles, for the most part, and in yeshiva predominantly, when the students, the Talmids, are getting together and they're working out, they're coming back and forth with, you said, I said, this one said, the other one said, etc. What do you think? This is what I say. No, you're wrong. Yes, you're right. Blah, blah, blah. Rashi, the foremost commentator of Tanakh, writes this. This is 1238. A multitude of people of various nationalities converted to Judaism. And here we have 2. Actually, we have 3, because I gave you from the actual cultural understanding of the 4th I will, from Exodus 6:7. I will take you out. Now, what happens? So we have the ethnic Jewish people, those that have genealogy going back to Jacob, plus those from the nations who were not ethnic Jews, who, because they saw the signs and the wonders, because they saw the plagues, and they knew that the water, the only water that they had, turned blood red. They knew that they had boils on their skin. They knew they had frogs leaping and lunging through their homes. They knew they had gnats buzzing all over them. They saw all of this stuff. And don't you think for a moment that some of them who understood that Pharaoh was God, that something different is going on here? There is a one true God, and it's not the guy that's telling us we got to make the pyramids. So that's the combination of the two in Exodus 12:39. Now in 40, it goes back to the combination of the two. There's a separation and a combination, and from here on out, except when you get to Numbers. I believe it's in Numbers, or maybe a different place. I forget a little bit from time to time. There's another account of mixed multitude, but it's not the same Hebrew words, and the mixed multitude is not what Brother Solberg indicates are the ones who caused the issue with the molten or golden calf. And here's why. Because if you look at Exodus 32, and that's where it comes from, and we're going to do this right now. Exodus 32, verse 1. It says, when the people, the Hebrew word for the people there is ha'am, the people. People. Ha'am, the people. In 32, Aaron said to them, who are the them?
That would be everyone, whether mixed multitude, ethnic Israelites, it'd be all of them. He's speaking to the whole crowd.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they're still, they're in the Sinai area. This is after the actual receiving of the Torah. Moses goes back up and we know the account. Okay. Now watch this in 32:3. Then it says, so all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. So what you would expect at this point in time, if there's going to be some type of distinction made between the former Egyptians who bound themselves to the Israelites, as Ruth did to Naomi, you would expect to see something, I don't know, different. However, the Hebrew reads this way. It says, call of the people. So who were all of the people who were involved there, who came out of Egypt, who then took gold and silver out of their ears and all of the other precious metal that gave them to Aaron, so Aaron could put together this molten calf? Who was it? Just the Israelites? Yes. Just the children, the ethnic children of Israel? No. all the people.
Yep. I mean, even when you look at the word Arab, right? The mixed multitude, you look at the lexicon, it'll tell you a people attached to another people. There's an attaching going on. So yeah, absolutely.
Now, let's stay with that thought, Tony. Attachment. And we could say with license, okay, a little bit of a stretch, but not off point. It would be a good way of connecting. So attaching is clinging. And when you're involved in agriculture, something is clinging. What are you trying to do? Well, Shaul says it very plain in Romans 11. Let's go there. Romans 11, starting with verse 13. And I'm reading from the ESV. Now I am speaking to you, Gentiles, inasmuch as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify myself, in order somehow to make my fellow Jews jealous and thus save some of them. For if their rejection means the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance mean but life from the dead? If the dough offered as first fruits is holy, so is the whole lump. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. But if some of the branches, this is 17, if some of the branches were broken off, and you, Gentiles, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in among others and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree, which is
Israel.
Yep. Not the church. Do not be arrogant towards the branches. If you are, remember that it is not you who support the root, but it is the root that supports you. 19. Then you will say, well, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. And here's the response. That's true. They were broken off because of their unbelief, but you stand fast through faith. So do not become proud, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, neither will he spare you. Note the kindness and the severity of God, severity towards those who have fallen, but God's kindness towards you, Gentiles, provided you continue in his chesed, in his loving kindness. Otherwise, you too will be cut off. And even then, if they do not continue in their unbelief, now talking to Jewish people, will be grafted in, for God has the power to graft them in again.
Right.
This is something that is mainly missed in both camps. In both camps. And I'll tell you this, when you share this with a Jewish person, that they're going to be grafted in again, what do you mean? I'm already in covenant. Which one? Which covenant are you talking about? The Noahide covenant? The one that the rabbis talk about? You're thinking that because you're a Jewish man and you became circumcised on the 8th day or whenever it may have been, now you're in covenant? That's a sign of the covenant, but that doesn't make you in the covenant any more than me parking a car that I used to have in the garage that I no longer have. Think it all the way through. The fact that there are two separate people groups now combined in one area, married, who became the children of Israel, the Israelites, does not make the ones who supposedly were the rebel rousers behind the golden calf incident, which happens to be a rabbinic ploy, by the way. It doesn't mean that there were only Jews and Gentiles. There were one people. Now, where do we see this clearly? We see it in Ephesians chapter 2. And I believe, and Tony, we went through this weeks ago in Ephesians 2. Everybody knows 8 and 9. Some people forget 10. But starting with 11, therefore, remember that at one time you Gentiles in the flesh, called the uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision, which is made in the flesh by hands. Remember, Gentiles, that you were at that time separated from Messiah. You were alienated from the commonwealth of Israel. You were strangers to the covenants. Notice it says covenants, plural, the covenants of promise. You had no hope. You had no God in this world. You were Messiahless. You were countryless. You were strangers. You were covenantless. You were promiseless. You were hopeless. And you were godless. Wow. Now that's the definition of a pagan in biblical times. But now, verse 13, but now in Messiah Yeshua, you who were once far off, Gentiles, have become brought near by the blood of Messiah. Why? For he is our peace, who has made us what? Both one. Jew and Gentile together as one, and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility. And by abolishing the law of the commandments expressed in ordinances, this is not the Torah, this is the added ordinances, that he, Yeshua, might create in himself one new man in place of the two, now making shalom, and might reconcile us both to God in one body through the execution stake, thereby killing the hostility. You are no longer strangers and aliens, but now you are fellow citizens. Fellow citizens where? Fellow citizens in the Commonwealth of Israel. Stop right there. Every country has a constitution. Torah has 70 different faces. Torah is not just, but primarily is teaching, instructions, precepts, principles, wisdom, and doctrine of Hashem for one purpose and one purpose only, for righteous living. But it's also constitution. Why is it the constitution? Because we have a commonwealth, or you can say we have a kingdom. Either way, it's the Commonwealth of Israel, not the country today of Israel, the Commonwealth of Israel. It's the Israel of God in Galatians 6:16, I believe.
Yep.
Okay. We've already seen the grafting in of the Jew and the Gentile becoming the one new man in Messiah. There's no Jew, there's no Greek, there's no woman, there's no man, there's no free, there's no slave. You're in Messiah, you're in the kingdom. Okay? Now, I'm going to read this because I got to find it. I should have had it up. Have to remember. I put it? So just bear with me.
Yeah, and for those of you who are listening, in case you didn't see the first video, what we're doing is Mr. Solberg kept trying to make this big distinction that that the Sinai covenant, the marriage covenant given at Sinai, was only to the nation of Israel, only the people of Israel, and you have this mixed multitude standing there, and you're totally excluding them when they totally joined in with Israel and said, "We will do all that the Lord has commanded." I mean, they had joined themselves to Israel, but Solberg wants to separate them. Okay, he wants to read his theology into the text, and it's not there. So, Brother Mitch has just been spending time bringing this all together, showing you that not only in the Hebrew scriptures is the Gentile who wishes by faith to join himself to Israel's covenants, who becomes part of the commonwealth of Israel. Not only did it happen in the Hebrew scriptures, but it's happening in the New Covenant scriptures also.
Okay, so I just found what I'm looking for. This is something that I wrote when somebody challenged me a couple of years ago, and it's been rewritten a couple of many different times. Anyway, so this is I've called. There's 4 parts. This is what is Torah, and this is 104. So there's 101, 102, 103. If you'd like them, let me know. Be happy to send them to you. And this one's called the Kingdom Rules. So here we go. Every king has a kingdom. Every kingdom has a constitution and citizens. The citizens of the kingdom are subject to the king's rules. The rules of the kingdom govern how the citizens of the kingdom are to live. How much more Yeshua, the righteous king, who established his righteous rules for living a righteous lifestyle for his citizens in his kingdom. Torah is exactly that. Teachings, instructions, precepts, principles, doctrine, wisdom, foundation, and constitution.
Yeah.
Torah contains the foundation of biblical faith, righteous rules given by Yeshua, the righteous king and Holy One of all Israel, for all his citizens, both Jew and Gentile, to enjoy living in his kingdom, living by the Constitution. There's only one king who is Lord, one faith and one baptism. There's only one set of rules for both the Jew and those from the nations, the Gentiles. Sadly, there are still some who are from the nations who desire to do what is right in their own eyes because they choose not to be subject to the king's rules and or believe Israel has no king. Now, let me back this up scripturally. So we left off, before we jumped to the golden calf, we left off at Sinai. Let me go back to Exodus 12 for a moment. We have 2 people groups combined together as one, being brought up out of Egypt by Moses in the historical Exodus. That's chapter 12 of Exodus. In chapter 14, they are immersed. They are baptized through the Sea of Reeds. Yes, they are baptized, identified with Moses. They were already a physically and spiritually redeemed people who had already performed tevilah, that's the Hebrew word for immersion, which is commonly referred to as baptism, who received the Torah at Sinai. Already physically at Sinai, we have the formal wedding ceremony But that's not all, because now in the next chapter 20, we have the covenant. The covenant terms are reduced. It's the summary of the covenant. It's the ketubah from verse 1 to 17 or 18, what commonly referred to as the 10 words. Okay, but then in chapter 21, 22, and 23, we have the physical, formal terms of the covenant. And then in Exodus 24, verses 1 through 8, we have that the entirety of the ketubah with the terms are now called and written, sprinkled with blood, confirming the covenant with a covenant meal after there was an offer and after there was an acceptance. The 4 elements of covenant: offer, acceptance, the shedding of blood, and a covenant meal. And the terms and the summary of the ketubah is now encapsulated in a term that's referred to as the book of the covenant. Now fast forward to the book of Jeremiah in chapter 31, verse 32. And I ask this question all of the time, especially for folks that have a theological degree of some sort, Bible Institute, a Bible college, a seminary. And the answer to this question, if you get it wrong, you mess up your entirety of what comes into and with you in the Brit Hadashah. And here's the question: what is the specific covenant they broke, referred to by Jeremiah in Jeremiah 31, 32? The knee-jerk, stereotypical reaction will be, well, that's the Mosaic covenant. That's the Sinai covenant. That's the Mosaic law. And to all 3 of them, it's the ketubah. It's the marriage covenant that was broken. The Torah was not broken, although the ketubah, the book of the covenant, is part of the Torah. It wasn't the entirety of the Torah. Now, here's a very difficult concept to understand. There's a difference between what is called the book of the covenant, which is basically Genesis 1:1 through Exodus 24:11. Then from 24:12 to the end of Exodus, we basically have the tabernacle instruction for the most part. And then starting with the book of Leviticus, which comes right upon the heels of the golden calf incident, we now have what is called the book of the law. And we can see this very plainly in Deuteronomy 31:26. And what's very interesting, because it says, I'm going to read from the New King James this time. 31:26. Take this book of the law and put it beside the Ark of the Covenant. Okay? So first question, what is in the covenant? What is in the Ark of the Covenant? Covenant. What else is in the Ark of the Covenant? Aaron's budded.
Yep, Aaron's rod.
beside. Look at that Hebrew word and compare it to the very word that was used in last week's parashah, the very last verse of Numbers 22, verse 1. Then the children of Israel moved and camped in the plains of Moab and on the side of the Jordan across from Jericho. In 22:1, they were on the side of Jericho. Of the Jordan, across from Jericho. The book of the law is placed where? Beside, next to the Ark of the Covenant. That's the distinction. Now you can doubt me, and that's fine and dandy. I would ask you to do this. Look at the very first word of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And they will all start the same way. They will start with the something. Vayakra or Leviticus, and he called. What I'm saying is this, is that it's all connected. Torah is all connected, but because there are 70 different faces of the Torah, different ways that you can view the Torah. Why? Because Yeshua is the living Torah, and what is he called? He's called a royal diadem. And if you look at a diadem this way, you'll get a different look. If you look at it this way, you'll see it differently. This way, you'll get another view. This way, you'll get another view. This way, you'll get another view. You get my point. So we have to come away from what we have been taught, thought, caught, or bought Torah is, because it really isn't. Unless you have been born into a Jewish family who has been Messianic, maybe you're a second or third generation Messianic Jew. God bless you. I wish that could be said of my family. I'm the first one. Or maybe you're a traditional Jew and you understand what Torah is. But if you, and this is not being condescending, but if you were a Christian and all that you knew was Christian terminology and theology, denominational doctrine and definition, you're going to have a very skewed understanding as to what you've been taught the law is. And now you're going to get involved with dispensation theology, and you're going to have to come to grips with a lot of things that are taught in that theological system that just somehow don't line up with Scripture. Don't take my word for it. What is being taught about the doctrine of the original sin? What is being taught about the immutability of God? What is being taught about the imminent return of Yeshua? But what must occur before Yeshua returns? Now, I have no bones to pick with anybody, except when you're going to start coming at me and you're going to tell me that because you don't know anything about me, except that you read something I wrote, and you find out that I do something that you have no concept of, that I am observing Torah, I'm keeping Torah, I'm doing Torah, whatever you want to call it, that I cannot be saved. What? First of all, saved from what? Where? Okay. So those would be the bones that I would have. And also, sacred namers, I love you to death, but I have no tolerance for you. So I don't know how that one really works.
Right. So, Brother Mitch, I'd like to read a passage that helps support what you've been sharing, and that is in Deuteronomy 29. So, Brother Mitch spent a lot of time at Mount Sinai, showing you the combination that the bride at Mount Sinai is made up of both Jew and Gentile that were taking on the covenant. And then Moshe is going to reiterate this the second time when they are about to enter into the land with the next generation. And so in Deuteronomy 29, starting with verse 9, Moshe says, "You are standing today, all of you." Okay, all of you. There's still Gentiles there. "Before Yahweh, your Elohim, the heads of your tribes, your elders, your officials, all the men of Israel, your children, your wives, and the outsider within your camp, from your wood chopper to your water carrier, each of you is to cross over into the covenant of Yahweh, your Elohim, that he is cutting with you today, and into his oath. This is in order to confirm you today as his people." And this would be a combination of the outsider and all the Israelites together as one. Okay. So he will be your Elohim, just as he promised you, and just as he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Yitzhak, and to Yaakov. "Not with you alone am I cutting this covenant and this oath, but with whomever is standing here with us today before Yahweh, your Elohim, and with whomever is not here with us today," which in my opinion would be future believers.
Absolutely. And why would that be? Because that, in essence or in part of, fulfills the promise made to Abraham. In you, all families will be blessed.
Right. Amen. Amen. So there is another, a bringing together of Jew and Gentile as one under the covenant. One covenant. We're not talking about the Noahic covenant. We're not talking about the covenant in Eden and so forth. We're talking about one covenant, one people. Just like Brother Mitch was saying, progressive revelation, things are getting better. Things are getting better as you get closer to Yeshua. The covenant is bringing you to Yeshua. Okay, everything is to funnel you to Yeshua. The only way you could even know Yahweh, the only way you could know him is through Israel prior to Yeshua coming, right? That was the only way you could. If you were of any other nation, you would not know Yahweh. He didn't have a covenant with them. If you wanted to know who the true God of the universe was, the creator of all things, you had to go to Israel. It's no different today. We come to Yeshua, who is the King of Israel, the Lion of Judah, right? The covenant is made with Israel. So, Mr. Solberg trying to make that, distinction and separation, it just doesn't work, right? And then he made, Brother Mitch, after that, he made some errors because he tried to talk about, look at the different laws between the Gentile and the Israelite, but he was not distinguishing the Hebrew words, right? You had nakri, you had the ger, you had the toshav, he wasn't distinguishing the difference in definitions of those types of Gentiles. So that's, pretty much where we left off last time. So I encourage you guys to go watch those videos because we go through the clips. We show you exactly what he says. And what we want to do now is pick up where we left off last time. And now he's going to try to continue to drive that wedge to say that everyone's under the moral law, but not everyone's under Torah. And so he's going to try and make that distinction here. And then we'll watch a few minutes or a minute or so of his sharing, and then Brother Mitch will weigh in on what's going on.
To all people. At this point, Torah keepers will.
This is a full 3 months of food.
Sorry about that.
Got
Got a
any
small.
refrigeration or special storage. You're looking.
There we go.
Will often shift their arguments to the parts of the Torah that deal with morality. They'll ask, well, if God didn't give the Torah to everyone, are you saying that murder and adultery were only forbidden for Israel and they're okay for everyone else to do? Well, obviously not. That would be silly. And honestly, that's a very sophomoric way to look at Scripture. When we read through the Torah, in fact, the entire Tanakh, we see Yahweh judge Gentile nations for their moral failings, for murder and adultery and wickedness. These are universal laws of right and wrong that existed long before the Torah was given at Sinai, and that every human being is aware of because we're all made in God's image. And while all nations are judged on these moral laws, it's only the nation of Israel that's ever judged for not keeping Sabbath or not eating kosher or not circumcising their males. Because Yahweh didn't give those specific commands to everyone. They were just for Israel to set her apart from all the other nations on the earth. There's a Messianic Jewish organization that made a great statement on this issue. This comes from Jewish believers in Jesus, and they wrote, "The gift of the Torah to the Jewish people at Sinai was not revelatory in the sense of the moral aspect of it. Noah was an Ish Tzaddik, a righteous man, and Abraham obeyed God's statutes and commandments, even long before the law at Sinai was given. Torah is not a revelation of morality, nor is the moral aspect of it unique in any way. A basic understanding of moral law is already embedded by God in the understanding of mankind. God did not appear to Israel at Sinai to present a moral code. God gave the law at Sinai, creating a unique nation. There are things given in the Torah which are unique to Israel."
All right, Brother Mitch, would you like to weigh in on that?
So I think the whole issue that he's making is one that we may have already beaten to death, and that is who or what becomes the nation of Israel. So let's go back very quickly. A man was called, that's Abraham. He became a family. The family became tribes. The tribes became a people. The people became a nation. The nation became a kingdom. All collectively, the children of Israel, the nation of Israel, the kingdom of Israel. This is before, listen carefully now, this is before Solomon's death. Okay, before and up to Solomon's death. We're not talking about post. We're not going to draw in Ephraim and Judah and the north and the south and all of that. We're stopping right there. So, okay. So who were the people, again, that received Torah? Now, one of the things that must be carefully done when you get into these types of discussions is to clearly define terminology or words, terms that are being used. For instance, what's Israel? Is Israel a person? Is it a country, a nation? Is it a kingdom? Is it a person? Is it a people? What's the context of what you're talking about? So
I think another thing good too, Brother Mitch, is to note what's the context of the other nations. They have no covenant. They don't even want to have a covenant. They're unbelievers too. Go ahead.
Okay. So one of the problems that I see with the whole thing is that just lost my thought. It's what happens when you start getting old. Youngheimer's catches up to you.
Could have been because I interrupted you. I apologize.
No,
but I mean,
turn off my.
Yahweh has he is always, he's the one choosing to distinguish and separate, because the promise is coming through. And so, he distinguished and separated Jacob and Esau, right? He distinguished and separated Yitzhak and Ishmael. And so that was all about bringing the promise through for the covenant people. And when we get to Israel, we're talking about a covenant, a nation. And this is the way you meet Yahweh. This is the way you have a relationship with him. You can't have a relationship with Yahweh being a Hittite, being a Canaanite, being an Egyptian. Okay. They don't have a covenant relationship with Yahweh. You have to come in through Israel. And that's what this is teaching you, is you have to be connected to Israel and her covenants.
That's it. So again, you have to be very careful as to what you mean by what you said. Otherwise, you'd be all over the place. So here, one of the things that I found that is very disconnecting is that in pieces, specifically the golden calf, he's referring to rabbinic commentary, but yet he doesn't use rabbinic commentary for what actually happened at Sinai, which is a marriage. And as I brought out, you know, with the three witnesses, we have the Gutnick translation, those that actually, what do they do with it?
Well, they used the term, they became converts, right? The
Right.
Gentiles became converts. And we know that in that time, there was no convert process, right? So again, you got to use the terminology in the right time frame, because the Judaism, let's face it, after the temple, or even the Judaism, in the first century, had a proselytized process that was created by men that was not there at Mount Sinai. So they're using terminology, but we got to understand what they meant back then,
Mm-hmm.
right? All
Yeah.
it was Gentiles put faith. They put faith in the God of Israel, and they followed Moses out of Egypt. By doing that, they became attached. They weren't asked to be circumcised first. They weren't asked, many things that would have been asked of a Gentile in the first century. They were just free to come. They attached themselves.
Okay. So, that's really the sum and substance of, that particular part. He uses rabbinic commentary, but yet doesn't use rabbinic commentary to demonstrate what actually occurred at Sinai. And so it's like, now for many people that are watching that, you're unless you have some sort of background in Jewish ministry, and know some of the, I don't want to say tricks, but they are, that the anti-missionaries or the counter-missionaries will use. These are my ethnic Jewish cousins who are going out to restore the Jewish soul that was stolen, and B, okay, now listen to this carefully, to teach to the Gentile that the proper way to come into covenant is something that is called something that it never was really called, and that is the Noahide laws. Now, wait a second. I know what you're thinking. Were there laws given to Noah? Absolutely. Were they called the Noahide laws then? Absolutely not. If you look at what is called the Noahide laws, of all of them, and there's not just the 4 classifications in Acts 15, we'll get to that in a moment, but there's, I believe there's like 10 of them. You'll find that maybe 3, 4 at the most were actually physically directly given to Noah. And what it is, it's a rabbinic ploy. I can't say it any other way. If you can come up with one, let me know. But it's a ploy to continue something that if you are in Yeshua, there isn't anymore. And that is to maintain a distinction between a Jew and Gentile. If you are in Messiah, there is no distinction. What he does say, Solberg, at the end of the video, he makes some points that if you don't understand terminology, if you're anti-Torah, anything that he said in this video, yeah, amen. Preacher, brother. I'm not being derogatory. I know what happens in the church because I was there. Not in his church, but I've been in the church, and that's what happened. Okay? If you are a Messianic Jew, you're going to come on the other side and you're going to say, what is this guy talking about? If you were in the church as from the nations, not from a Jewish genealogy, and you've come out of the church, and now you are practicing Torah the best way that you know how, you're going to say, what's with this guy? He doesn't get it. And it depends upon terminology and how much revelation that you have. Now, here's something really interesting, because Torah is, in fact, revelation.
Right.
I have to laugh because that's just a standard teaching throughout any facet of Judaisms, which also includes Messianic Judaism. But sadly, rabbinic Judaisms will discount and discard and say that, nah, you're worshiping an idol. Okay. What are you doing? You're worshiping Talmud. What is that? I made a broad statement, by the way.
Yeah.
So those are really problematic. They really, really are. And I know he touches upon Acts 15 a little bit with the Jerusalem Council and the Noahide laws.
Yeah, he's got some teachings out on Acts 15. I mean, we'd be happy to do those also. I know you're going to touch on it too, but everyone out there, we'd happy to go through them in more detail.
Yeah. Okay. So, when I have to, and you and I, Tony, we discussed this a while back, and that was when I'm listening because I say, okay, so you sent it to me, so I know it's got to be something that's going to have some meat and potatoes for either something that we are totally for or something that we're totally against. So I'm listening and say, okay, so this guy's anti-Torah. I get that plain and clear. And then he totally lost me when the next segment, he's coming at Sinai. And it's like, you missed it.
Right.
You just missed it. Totally missed it. And that was it for me.
Yeah.
But I did over the weekend, and actually last night, I did watch through the entirety of his video presentation. I have a plethora of notes, most of which we've talked about today.
Well, brother,
it's going to be this way.
Yeah, let's continue though. Let's go watch a little bit more. Definitely what I got from what Brother Mitch was just saying is, number one, the Noahide laws were something invented, this whole list invented hundreds of years after the resurrection of Yeshua. The Talmudic reference that is given there in the Tosefta and other places is a much later work. It's something that developed over time in rabbinical Judaism. It was not there in the first century. So we do have to be careful and know the time frames of what we're reading when we're reading the Talmud and so forth. Noah, when he came off, he wasn't just given, moral laws as people like to. He also had a sacrificial system that he already knew and operated on how you worship Yahweh, right? And so all of these are being built towards Abraham, towards Yitzhak, towards the nation of Israel. Everything is being built one thing upon another for Yahweh's people. You get into the Hittites, the Canaanites, and so forth, they weren't worshiping the way Noah was worshiping Yahweh. They had come to worship the other deities, the other gods. They weren't following the sacrificial system rules and regulations that Noah knew, right? Everything is being passed on a pure worship to Yahweh. down to Shem, down to Abraham, down to, and so forth. So you're really getting off base when you try saying that, well, Yahweh didn't give this to those nations, that to this nation. Well, of course, they weren't believing. They were unbelieving. We're talking about believers coming together. And if you're a Gentile, the only way you could become a believing Gentile was to attach yourself to Israel. Okay. The way you attach yourself to Yeshua automatically attaches yourself to Israel and her covenants. You can't separate Yeshua from the covenants. So it's still the same.
You can't. Let me, maybe I should save this for later when we close it out, but
Okay.
but I'm going to do it now.
Okay, go ahead.
To summarize, this would be my stance for anyone who is anti-Torah, antinomial is the Greek word. And that would be, so you're saying, in essence, that Torah is not for everybody today. I'm listening to you. Okay. I hear you loud and clear, but let me ask you a question. So would you agree that Isaiah chapter 2 is for today, or it's for sometime in the future? Well, yeah, Mitch, it's sometime in the future. Okay. And would you agree that sometime in the future would be the millennial kingdom or a different period? No, Mitch, that's the millennial kingdom. Okay. So let's go to Isaiah chapter 2 for a moment. And I just want to talk about, this section is typically referred to as the house of God, Be'el. So here I'm going to read, and we're going to focus in on one verse. I'm going to stop at verse 3, but we'll lead up to it. And maybe we'll go down to 4. So the word that Isaiah, the son of Amoz, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains. Okay. And shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. So what is this saying? The plain, simple, literal understanding. This would be the Peshat of Torah. All nations, all people groups, no matter where you were born from, no matter what country you associate with, no matter if you are a Jew or a Gentile, no matter if you are saved or unsaved. Okay, because ultimately, we have only 2 people groups.
Yep.
We got the saved, or we have the righteous, and we have the unrighteous. Okay? The unsaved and the saved. So all people, every single one of them, are going to do what? Are going to come up, shall flow to it, the mountain where the house of the Lord is.
You are on mute. Yep.
Sorry about that. Verse 3. Many people shall come and say, come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. To the house. Is this the house of Jacob? No, it's the house of the God of Jacob. Now, let me stop there for a moment. There's a big distinction between the God of Abraham, the God of Abraham and Isaac, and the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Muslims believe in the God of Abraham. Muslims believe in the God of Abraham and Isaac. Muslims do not believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is, in fact, the one who is throughout the Bible that we didn't really know about early on in Genesis, but continued to reveal himself through Scripture. and becomes the God of the Bible, personified the mountain of the Lord to the house of the God of Jacob. And he will do what? He will teach us his ways. He will teach us his derek. That's the Hebrew word for way. Yeshua said what? I am the way. Ani derek. I am the way. I am the truth. Ani ha'emet. And I am the life. Ani ha'chayim. He shall teach us his ways. His ways are where? His ways are what? Where are his ways found? What are his ways collectively called? Torah.
Yep.
Torah, 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 Torah. He shall teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. His word is a light to our path and a lamp to our feet, a light to our path, and he orders our steps in his word. And that's the why, or that's the what. Here's the why. And this is part of the Torah service every Shabbat in every type of Jewish synagogue, either rabbinic congregation or a messianic synagogue. This is part of the Torah service. For out of Zion shall go forth the Torah. Out of Zion will go forth the Torah and the word of the Lord. What's the word of the Lord? It's the same thing.
Yep.
From where? Jerusalem. That's where he sets up camp.
Sure. It's two ways of saying the same thing. I said it's two ways of saying the same thing. It's very Jewish. Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So in essence, to summarize what I'm bringing out here, for people who believe that Torah is not for those who are of faith in the biblical Yeshua, okay, not for today. So how do you reconcile with the fact that it will be sometime down the corridor of time in the millennial kingdom? I'm still waiting for the answer. It's similar to you're saying that when Yeshua came, no more offerings, no more sacrifices, because he was the one-time sin for all. Okay, I agree with you, except how do you reconcile that with Zechariah, Isaiah, Ezekiel in the millennial kingdom, when there are still what I prefer to call the sacrificial system, the offering system, is still there.
Yeah. Yep.
What is it for? It's not for sin. And all that the offerings did is it provided an atonement. Atonement never took anything away. Atonement is covering. And if you understand the word Yom Kippur, it's the day of covering, but it's properly referred to as Yom HaKippurim, the day of coverings, because if you read carefully through Leviticus 16, you're going to see that there were many, many things that were covered by the blood one time a year for annual purification. Nothing was taken away. Not one thing.
Brother Mitch, let's go ahead and we only got about 2 minutes left in the video, maybe 2.5 or so. So let's see what his final words are. Oops, there we go.
So what is the relationship of the Gentile Christian to the law of Moses? Now, if the evidence we just looked at in the Torah wasn't enough for you, you can flip over to Acts 15, where we see that exact question asked and answered at the Jerusalem Council. Paul and James and Peter and Barnabas and the other elders determined that Gentile believers were not required to be circumcised or keep the law of Moses, that they don't need to become Jews in order to follow the Jewish Messiah. Instead, they said, "It has seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us to lay on you no greater burden than these requirements, that you abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, and from blood, and from what has been strangled, and from sexual immorality." That's it.
Why doesn't every home in the U.S. have solar panels?
Sorry.
The number one reason is not about
Right to a
sunlight or
commercial.
weather or
The council didn't require them to keep Shabbat, or the feasts, or the kosher food laws, or the purity laws, or any other civil or ceremonial observances. They were given no greater burden than these 4 restrictions. And the restrictions were given to foster unity with their Jewish brothers and sisters in Christ. And by the way, I look at the Jerusalem Council in more detail in a couple other videos, which I'll link to below. This brings us to a really interesting question that I've been doing a lot of study on lately, and where my understanding is shifting a bit. And that question is this: what is the relationship of the Jewish follower of Jesus to the law of Moses? Now,
I want to stop right there real quick because he's going to go into what's the responsibility of a Jewish follower of Messiah. So that's something a little bit different. So Acts 15, kind of like what you were sharing, Brother Mitch. I mean, where he has it totally wrong is there was 2 questions that were asked. Number one, do they need to follow the circumcision laws, okay, which were the customs of Moshe? They call it the customs, which is really man's tradition, and commanded to follow the law of Moshe. There's 2 questions that are being answered, and actually this gentleman, Solberg, misses it. The first one, the answer is no. You do not have to be circumcised in order to be part of the kingdom, to enter the kingdom, and so forth. But the second one was yes, you do have to follow the command. And the idea of these 4 commandments that were given, they all have to do with idolatry. Right? They all have to do, that's the biggest fear, right, of a Jewish follower of Yeshua, that when these Gentiles come in, they will bring in their idolatrous ways. We can't worship together if you're going to worship multiple gods along with Yeshua. So idolatry is out. Things that are strangled, that's idolatrous worship. They drank the blood, ate the blood of the animals. Sexual immorality, temple prostitution. It was a form of worshiping the other deities. All right. And then, of course, blood, anything to do with blood, drinking blood, eating blood, so forth. Everything on these 4 had to do with idolatrous worship. That had to be stopped right away before we could even commune together. And then, of course, in verse 21, they're going to learn the rest when they go on Shabbat to hear the words of Moses. There is no new covenant scriptures that has been canonized at this time. How else are they going to learn Yahweh's ways? They have to hear the law of Moses. I mean, am I off on that, Brother Mitch?
I know.
It's a total Gentile way of reading the scriptures and not understanding the context, right?
Sadly, it's again, the Western Church theology, terminology, denominational doctrine, and definitions creeping in. One more time.
They don't have any distinction between an oral law that is present in the first century and the law of Moses, right? But that's what's going on there. There is a distinction in Acts 15. On one part, they're talking about the oral law of the day, the proselytization process of converting to being a Jew. No, Yeshua was not asking, Paul or anyone else was not asking someone to go through that proselytization, that oral law tradition that of the first century. But that in no way means you weren't supposed to follow the Torah.
Well, let's back it up a little bit. So with verse 29, this is where the confusion starts to come in.
Okay.
I'm sorry, verse 20. But that will back it up. So to 19, therefore I judge that we should not trouble those from among the Gentiles who are turning to God. The kingdom, repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand. That's why he's Yohanan the Immerser. People were repenting, and one of the ways that you demonstrated repentance was through immersion. Not the way it's practiced in the church, but and not the only reason for immersion or baptism, which is commonly referred to. And if you don't believe me on that, then just go to Hebrews 6:2, or more affectionately Messianic Jews 6:2, and you'll see the doctrines, plural, or the doctrine of baptisms, plural. So there are many different ways to become immersed, perform tevilah, or become baptized, other than the one that's predominantly today known throughout the church world, and that is believers' baptism. That's
Sure.
one form only of the many different ways that you can. Some of them would be every new moon. Another would be the 3 times a year, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Another would be for women after they've had their menstrual cycle. Another would be for both the bride and the groom before they're becoming married.
Sure.
Another would be after having intimate relationships. Okay, which is when you get into Hebrews and it says the marriage bed shall not be defiled. That is what he's talking about here. It's ritual purity.
Right.
That's what it is. It has nothing to do with what we make it to believe today in 2020 from the Western church mindset. But continuing. So in verse 20, but that we write to them, that's to the Gentiles who are now turning to God, to do these things, to abstain from. Now, these are categories.
Yep.
And you see that these are categories specifically in Leviticus 18. So these are not 4 laws. Only, okay, so abstain from sexual immorality. That's a category lumping together all of the deviant sexual practices that were going on. Some of them were brother and sister, mother and son, father and daughter, with animals. Ugh. Temple prostitute worship. Okay. So categories. Abstain from things polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, from things strangled, and from blood. That's the what. Here's the why. Always remember that behind the what, there's always a why. Always look for the why. Because if you just say something, which is a what, and you have no understanding to back it up with the why you believe what you believe, you're toast.
Sure.
You'll be toast. So here's the why. For Moses had been throughout many generations those who preach him in every city. Let me stop there. So there's a common fallacy that the only place that Jewish people in the first century could worship was in the temple. Wrong. Wrong. Well, think with me, okay? Where we stopped off before at the man became a family, the family became tribes, the tribes became a people, the people became a nation, the nation became a kingdom, the kingdom split. Okay, we're going to take it a little bit further now. The kingdom split after Solomon's death. Now we have the northern kingdom called Israel, or the house of Israel. And now we have the southern kingdom called the house of Judah. We have Samaria and we have Jerusalem. But what happens in 722? We have the Assyrian captivity. The 10 tribes are taken away. Not everybody was taken away, because the Levites were part of the 10 tribes, because what they did is they officiated, if you will, in the temple. Now, even though the Northern Kingdom had a false worship system, the Levites were still officiating. So they're out of business. They have no more job. What do? They come back down to Judah. Only took away the top level people. They didn't care about the peasants. 586, what happens? Babylonian captivity. There goes Daniel. Okay. Here's the issue. Now, you've heard maybe Talmud. Why? And here's something else that many have no concept of. Why or what, how, when, where was Talmud started to become formalized? Not talking about the redaction, not talking about the actual writing of the oral law. It was never supposed to be written anyway. But it was because, just think with me, how are we going to keep our traditions? How are we going to keep our practices in a foreign land without any temple? So what was developed in the diaspora, in Babylon of all places, so you can't say, you will, but it will be wrong to say that everything in Babylon is wrong. Because in Babylon started the house worshiping, which became known as house synagogues, which were in essence small congregations all around. You had the one big temple until 70, and then no more. But from 586 in the diaspora, what are we going to do? Oh, we'll start a home group. We'll call it a cell group.
Right.
Okay. Nothing new under the sun. So that's number one. So Moses had throughout many generations those who preached him in every city. Okay, so that's that. Being read in the synagogues. Now you know why there were synagogues and not just the temple. But when? Every Shabbat. What is Moses preaching? What does that refers to? For Moses has had throughout many generations those who preach him. What is preaching Moses about?
Torah.
Teaching Torah. What is the basis, the basic definition of Torah? Teaching and instruction. Now we have the classic definition of Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. We have a broad definition of what Torah is, which would be the 39 books in whatever order they may appear, because there's different orders of a Protestant Bible, and also the Tanakh. Same 39, just in a different order. But then you have the broadest definition of Torah, and that would be everything, all 66, from Genesis throughout Revelation. And why am I saying that? Can you, yes or no, find teaching and instructions throughout every book of the Bible, all 66? The answer is, you betcha. That's Torah in the broadest definition. But what was happening? We have those who knew had no clue who God was, had no interest, but somebody along the way was sharing with them, and they saw something different about their lifestyle. And this goes to 2 Corinthians 3:2 and 3, that we are a written letter, written with ink upon our hearts, not of stone. Doesn't match the talk. It ain't no good. It's just no good. People are watching us. People know we're supposed to be different. And here's a classic example. Many years ago, the last time that I was married, we're going to the reception. And my mom is there, along with my father, etc. And the meal is served, and we just start eating. And she gives me one of these. What, Ma? It's my wedding day. She said, aren't you supposed to pray before you eat? So we stopped and we prayed. Okay. Everybody who is not a believer knows what believers are supposed to do. We're supposed to be separate and apart. Okay. So Torah is being preached. Torah is being taught in the synagogues and in the temple on Shabbat. Now, what was this all about? Here's the analogy, and I use this often. In the church world, at the end of the service, after the altar call, and if a particular church does or doesn't have it, everybody does things differently. But everyone that I was ever in, a part of, always had some form of a counseling session. And I was always part of the counseling team. And the standard counseling instruction for those who had just prayed a prayer, probably had no clue what they did, probably just got up out of their chair because they felt something that was different, and they came forward, and you talk with them and said, okay, so what are you going to do? How would you counsel them before you may never see them again in your life? Because many people, they never come back. Well, keep on coming back. Well, I don't know anything. That's the purpose, and keep on coming back. Same thing right here. Moses is being preached. Torah is being preached on Shabbat, because that was the day of instruction.
Yep.
It's similar to today, where there's a large congregation and everybody is out. I'll talk about the church world. Everybody goes out. But then one day a week on Sunday, you come in to get instruction. Well, guess what? That's true, but where does that come from? Right here, Acts 15:21.
Yep.
Not to say there wouldn't be instruction from some older brother or sister, realizing that maybe they were in the marketplace, and this pagan, this Gentile, continued to buy from them or transact with them or do something, and they want, hey, Tony, there's something about you. What's going on with you? And you start to share. And people who really want to know will follow. People will really want to know, will open their hearts and open their eyes to listen. But people don't care what you know until people know that you care.
So yeah, I mean, the synagogue is the only place where the scriptures are being read. It's the only place you're going to learn. And like you said, those 4 categories are all found in the Torah. That's how you learn the different laws that pertain to those categories. So yeah. Makes total sense. It's again attaching yourself to Israel. There's that attachment. I mean, when you look in Jeremiah 31, verse 30 through 34, there is no covenant with Gentiles. You have to come into Israel. The covenant is made with Israel. If you're going to say the Sinai covenant was, oh, that's only for Israel, not for us Gentiles, you know, that was just Yahweh making it with Israel, well, then you're going to have to say the same thing for the new covenant, because there was no, I'm not going to find some passage in there where Yahweh pulls the Gentiles aside and said, here's my covenant with you. If you believe in Yeshua, this is your covenant. And then that's the Gentile covenant. There is no passage. So it'll be interesting to see what Solberg is going to say now to believe in Jews in Yeshua. What is their relationship to the Torah? Is he going to say they don't need to do that too? Let's find out.
Still working it out, so we're going to have to save the details for another video, but let me just say this. I've come to believe that Jewish followers of Jesus have a different relationship to the Torah than do Gentile followers of Jesus. Neither are required to keep Torah as a matter of salvation or righteousness, of course. There's nothing any of us can do to add to what Jesus has already done on our behalf. But I've come to see how Jewish believers in Yeshua may have a sort of calling to maintain the boundary markers of their Jewish identity by keeping Torah, at least in a fashion that's appropriate under the new covenant. But that's for another discussion. And in either case, the Bible is crystal clear. Gentiles are not and have never been under the law of Moses. Keeping Torah is not required of Gentiles. And at the same time, things like Shabbat and kosher food laws and circumcision and the feasts haven't been prohibited or forbidden under Yeshua. We're free in Christ to observe such traditions, provided, of course, that they're undertaken as a matter of personal preference or cultural calling, rather than a requirement of salvation or a condition of righteousness. But when it comes to Gentiles who want to be Torah observant, things start to get a little strange, in my opinion. Now, biblically speaking, Gentiles are free in Christ to observe whatever Jewish traditions they want. I've attended a Passover Seder and a couple of Sabbath services at a local Messianic synagogue, and I loved it. I learned a lot, and I was blessed by the experiences. So I understand the motivation behind wanting to adopt the Mosaic traditions. These are the same rituals that Jesus kept. However, Jesus was Jewish, which means that, unlike Gentiles, he was born under the law of Moses. The danger in Torah-observant Christianity is the belief that keeping Torah is required of all Christians. Far too often, Torah keepers look down on Christ followers who don't keep those traditions. They characterize them as lawless and walking in sin, and I mean, I've been accused of this many times. But the bottom line is this: if you're not Jewish, the law of Moses has never applied to you. Thanks for watching. Shalom.
Brother Mitch?
Okay, well, let me commend him in that he rightly said, loud and clear, for everybody who would listen to the end of the video. And I know how it works with us.
Right.
So, you know, for somebody who has a larger following than we do, it's got to be the same. But that he rightly said that observing, keeping, guarding Torah, doing Torah is not a requirement for salvation. Nobody has ever said that. Nobody has ever believed it, except if you're in an antiquated church system or a denomination who believes otherwise. Okay.
That's why, to me, I mean, he creates some straw man issues along the way, that some stuff that we don't even teach. So that's a problem.
Yeah. There is here's something else that he I believe he got right, nailed on. There, when it comes to calling, this is one of those issues that as an ethnic Jewish believer in Yeshua, I have to be very careful in how I say things because I know it's offensive to others. Because people will not listen carefully to what I'm saying, and they will say that I said something different. And I know many others of my ethnic brothers and sisters in Yeshua, Jewish brothers and sisters in Yeshua, who, where did you get that from? Okay. However, I do know some who are Jewish believers, and it's kind of like a reverse anti-Semitism, but you can't use that word because anti-Semitic is only against the Jewish people. What I'm saying is this: there's massive anti-Semitism within the body of Messiah. Mainly it comes from those HRM people and some other whacked out, disconnected denominations, of which there were over 32,000. You wonder why there's so much divisiveness within the body. But there, and because of that, there are some Jewish believers who wrongly believe that because those from the nations have misinterpreted Torah and misinterpreted Brit Hadashah for so many years, that there's just a net cast over everybody, a blanket net. And because you're not a Jew, you don't know anything, and you shouldn't even be here. That would be similar to many times somebody not Jewish attempting to walk into a Chabad synagogue. You're going to get stopped at the door. What are you doing here? You're going to get grilled. You will be. Okay. So I understand that, but it's wrong. I have encountered online many who have a distaste in their mouth, and you see it in their writing because they had a bad experience in some type of a messianic congregation. That would either be a messianic synagogue, and I haven't been in, let's see, one, two, the only home of a messianic synagogue is where I've been for 14 years. That's home, Kehillat Bet Avinu. I've been in other messianic synagogues. Okay. There was one in Gainesville where the rabbi is totally inaccessible. Won't even shake your hand. Wouldn't shake mine anyway. That's like, and I went with a pastor friend of mine, and he's loving it. And we're talking on the way home, and he's, what about this? What about that? And I'm saying, did you understand that he was so inaccessible? Like, I'm better than you. That's what comes off many times. It shouldn't be that way. There's also a lot of other issues that those who are from the nations cannot be part of leadership. Where is that in Brit Hadashah? You know, so I understand a lot of those things. That's not me. That's not what we do at Kehillat Bet Avinu, and that's not what I have seen in the two other messianic synagogues that I have attended for special occasions. One of which is kind of like a home away from home. When I go traveling, I know I can go speak there. So that's that. But he uses terms. So there is, though, a separate calling on the Jewish person who becomes a believer in Yeshua versus the person from the nations who becomes a believer in Yeshua. It's a separate calling, but we're no different in Yeshua. So think of calling as spiritual gifts for a moment. It's the only analogy that I can come up with that might make sense. And that is, the gifts are available to everybody, but not everybody has the same gift. Not everybody has the same giftedness. Kind of in Yeshua, there's no difference. That's clear from Galatians 3:28, 3:29. But there's a separate calling upon the life. Now, I believe what he's referring to there is that he is in a way, and again, I don't know, but I'm going to put words in his mouth, that he's actually confirming a need for a messianic synagogue. That's what I'm hearing him saying. He uses the term under the law. Yeah. So what are we going to do? So are you going to say, well, I'm not under the law, I'm under grace? So, okay. You're going to continue to perpetuate a false dichotomy? So now we look at John 1:17, and there's that word inserted that nobody understands it was inserted. If you look carefully, in almost every Bible translation, the word but is in italics, meaning there is no word but in the original. And it appears that because the word but is in there, the law came from Moses, but grace and truth came from Yeshua. Well, if you look at the words grace and truth, which are chesed and emet, they're abound throughout Tanakh. And guess what? You'll find them in the last book of the Bible, in Revelation, where Yeshua is actually called, guess what? Grace and truth. So, come on.
Yeah, Brother Mitch, for me, I mean, where he keeps making a mistake in the video is he generalizes the law of Moses as traditions, the traditions of Moses, the traditions of Israel. He does not, again, understand there's a distinction that within the law of Moses, Jewish brethren and sisters have developed traditions in order to express certain laws a certain way. But that doesn't change the law. The law is the same for the Gentile as it is for the Jew, but how you may traditionally express how a synagogue service is, or how you do a immersion. And so there are basic traditions that have developed over hundreds and hundreds of years that are distinctively connected to this is from the Jewish culture, right? But that doesn't change the fact that the law was the same, which is why even Gentiles who are still under the law of Moses can develop certain traditions on how things are done. I think that's where you get to say there is messianic congregations and then there's a messianic synagogue, right? They're all under the law of Moses, but how they express certain traditions, which is freedom, that's the freedom we have in Yeshua, right? There's certain synagogue traditions that are going to distinctively show a Jewish heritage tradition that distinguishes you from the other nations. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? And I think that's where he keeps getting things totally messed up.
Well, on that point, let me make two different ones. Number one, at synagogue, Kehillat Bet Avinu, we have a large amount of those from the nations who have joined. They understand Bible. They've joined themselves to Israel. Okay, and they keep coming because they understand, like Ruth, who joined herself to Naomi. Sure. They are part of the Jewish people. There's not the church in Israel. That's a
Exactly.
false dichotomy.
Amen.
There's one bride. He only married one at Sinai. The marriage supper of the Lamb is going to be with one bride. Okay, not two. It's not the church he's going to marry. So that's number one. But number two, and I think to more appropriately talk to that point, is with traditions, there are two main. There are many different Jewish traditions, but the two main ones are Ashkenaz and Sephardic. I come from the Ashkenaz tradition. That's Eric Hazar, you can't be him. You know what? Go take a hike. Just go take a hike. But then there's the Sephardi. Now the Sephardi are, if you trace everything back, what one has to understand through the little history lesson that we took of Israel. Israel 97. Okay, the man became a family became a nation, or rather became a tribe, became a nation, became a kingdom. The kingdom split. 722, 586. Where'd everybody go? Where did most people go? Okay, so great dispersion. So, but there are what I've learned in 14 years of being at synagogue, because we have a predominant Hispanic Jewish number of people who call our place home, mostly from South America. Pick a country in South America. The only one that I could possibly think of that maybe we don't have is Uruguay, and I might be wrong, or maybe Bolivia, and I could be wrong, but Peru, yep. Colombia, yep. Brazil, Ecuador, Venezuela. We have bunches, and they're all Jewish. And it's amazing to me, because in Sephardi tradition, there are no different branches of Judaism, just one. And they're all, we would call them basically, they're all Orthodox. It's still only one Torah for all of the Jewish people. The way that Pesach is observed in Sephardi homes, totally different from how I grew up. And here's one of them. In Ashkenaz, for a long period of time, we couldn't eat rice during Pesach because rice puffed up, and therefore it was considered leaven. Ashkenaz home, you would never consider having lamb. Sephardis do. So the joke is that during Pesach, everybody becomes a Sephardi because you get to eat more food. And so
yep.
I was against lamb for years and years and years. And 2 years ago, where I led a home seder, I from synagogue, and I'm discussing the seder, and what we do, why we don't do it, and we come to why we don't eat lamb, and then the hostess says, "Well, excuse me, but that's what we're having for dinner." And huh?
Yeah.
No, this is what we do. Sephardi. Okay.
Right.
So, but is there two separate Torahs? No.
Right.
It's one Torah. We just interact with it differently.
That's right. Amen. Good way of putting it. So everyone, I hope you enjoyed. I think we're not going to be able to get into Dr. Michael Brown's video. We're going to do that starting next week. We want to give that its due. I mean, he's a great brethren in the Lord. We would disagree on this aspect, and we'll show you why. But Dr. Brown is a beloved man in the kingdom, beloved man in the body of Messiah. Great respect for him, and we have, again, respect for Solberg also. But as you can see, there is some differences. You need to study. You need to show yourself approved. We do have to go back to the Hebrew. We do have to go back to the Greek, the Jewish culture. You have to understand there were Judaisms of the first century, not a Judaism. There's traditions alongside the law of Moses. You can't just be lumping everything together. All right. And so, yes, it does take some study. It does take effort. It does take iron sharpening iron and bouncing things off of talking to many ethnic Israelites, all right, from many different points of view. And so you got to do your homework. You just really got to do your homework. Amen. The goal is for us to be one in Messiah, to be unified, for the discipleship of Messiah to be legit and solid and moving forward, because it's very chaotic right now. It's very much in disarray. We're in the end times. This is to be expected, but a remnant is going to remain faithful. And so we want to be a part of that remnant. Okay. Throughout the book of Revelation, it will tell you perseverance of the saints to those who keep the commandments of God and faith in Yeshua. So yes, keeping the commandment of God matters. It's not how you enter the kingdom. It's not how you enter into salvation, but walking in the kingdom matters.
There are lots of different individual separate studies that we can make available for this part and also last week. And we'll put them up on Tony's YouTube channel.
Sure, I can put them in the description box. I can put the links in the description box. So yeah.
Okay.
Amen.
So that people can have them. If you have difficulty, what I always recommend is that for one of the reasons is to subscribe to Tony's YouTube channel is because he's more technically oriented than I am. And he has lots and lots of good content. So thank you for that, Brother Tony.
Amen. Yeah, if you want to get in contact with either one of us and you can only get to one of us, hey, we are happy to exchange with you how I can get you in contact with Brother Mitch. He can get you in contact with me. If you want to see and understand more of Brother Mitch's ministry in Uganda there, get a hold of me. I'll get you in contact with him. You can message him on Facebook there, we'll get you there. We'll get you in contact with them. So, yeah, we appreciate the comments. We appreciate the questions. Also, just keep asking more questions. And yes, we are going to be doing Dr. Brown's video next week. I really see a lot of fruit in a lot of this of touching on videos and then explaining a little bit more. So I would expect us to be doing more of that here in the future. Just so that we can be more crystal clear on where the confusion is and how oftentimes we're misrepresented. So, and we don't want to misrepresent others. Also, that's not our goal. So, so yeah, we will hopefully be back with you next week as we bring this to a close. Keep us in prayer as we continue to pray for the body of Messiah. We pray for Israel and everything that is going on, and we pray for Yeshua's second coming. Maranatha, Yeshua, may he come soon. Amen. So,
amen.
Blessings and shalom, everyone.
Shalom.